the end of the day, if you're working in music, you're really lucky, and it's definitely going to be tough sometimes. Yes, I came to Leaderville TAFE and studied the music course there. There was no music business course there, but there were business units as part of the course, and yeah, just found that really interesting. I started volunteering at a venue in Leaderville called The Kitchen, doing bookings and putting shows on, and from that kind of volunteered to start working with a friend's band, some guys I went to school with, and they had a band called Super Engines, and yeah, I sort of came on board and started working with those guys as a manager, and then from there started managing a band called New Rules for Boats, and yeah, just kind of, started there, just kind of, my way into it. I think it's a little bit different from band to band. Some things are the same, but every band's got a different dynamic, and there's always sort of different people in a band that might have certain strengths in some areas that they handle really well. Some bands have a really good graphic designer. Some bands have someone that is really good at handling their bookings and sort of taking care of all of that. I've even had bands that have had like a bookkeeper or an accountant in there, which is great. I think certainly what it is, the main thing I think probably is universal between all the acts I work with is trying to manage the band as a team of people, but then also bringing other people into the team around that band and helping them sort of find the right avenues to go down, the right people to work with. And yeah, I suppose really it's kind of managing the band as a team, and then also managing that band around the team as the band's business starts to grow and you start working with publicists or booking agents and distributors and so on. Every time it's been pretty organic. There's been some other kind of, either I've sort of worked with someone in that band in a previous band, or I might have done a bit of publicity or a bit of distribution work and kind of helped them out in some other respect. So it's kind of, every case is a little bit different, but they're definitely, in every case I've got some sort of prior relationship where I kind of, I think we already sort of know that we'll probably get along and it's gonna work on some level, and then, I guess you kind of take it to the next level. You don't always kind of kick off the relationship with a contract, but if it sort of comes to a point where you, you're kind of feeling that things are working and it's pretty good, and then you formalize it. Then I definitely, when I sort of talk to a band, we go, okay, let's do this. I'll definitely sort of tell them, this is my commission rate, and this is what I'll do, and this is what I won't do, and this is what I'll charge on. I may not necessarily start doing that right from the get-go, but it definitely comes up early on so that there's no kind of surprises later on. And it's always been pretty, I've been pretty lucky. I don't think I've had any bands I've worked with that sort of don't feel like I've added, value to what they're doing. And I think in most cases, it's sort of gone pretty well. There's definitely been times where you're working with a band and the relationship just sort of naturally comes to an end, and it might be because the band's kind of no longer really doing things, or it might be just for whatever reason things aren't quite working. But I've been pretty lucky that even bands that I've sort of finished up working with, still had a pretty good relationship with them. It's obviously not everyone is that lucky, but I've been pretty lucky in that respect so far. Like especially when you first start working with an artist, especially if they're young, and if they haven't had a lot of experience, they will default to you, because they're sort of looking to you as the person who's maybe been around the block a few times. But what I find more and more, and this is not a bad thing, I think it's it's how it should be. But what happens is as you work with an artist more and more, and they start to develop artistically, and they develop also, from a business sense, and they start to understand their band not just as an artistic entity, but also as a business entity. I think they start to get more confident and more clear on what they want to do and what they don't want to do. And that's great, but it's sort of interesting because I think any time where, if you work with an artist long enough, that starts to happen. And if you're not kind of aware that's happening, it can be a little bit like awkward, like, oh, but hang on, but I sort of think this, but actually it's a really good thing, as long as they're kind of, making those decisions for the right reason. Because, ultimately if they keep doing something and they're unhappy with it, that's not a sustainable sort of model for them. But I think it's also, it's definitely been times where, an artist I've worked with has maybe turned down something that I didn't think they should have done, but they're very clear about why they're doing it, and, that's fine. I mean, ultimately, they're the ones that have to go out and actually represent, themselves and their art, and, if they're uncomfortable with something or they don't want to do something, it's not going to work. But, I think I've been pretty lucky. Once again, most of the time it's been pretty, we've seen eye to eye on most things, but yeah. every band I work with, I love their music. You know, helping that music, some art that you love, finding a bigger audience is incredibly rewarding. You know, it's great when a band's early in their career and their friends and family are kind of coming to their shows. That's great, you know. But it's also a really good moment when you're working with an act and they kind of play that show, and all of a sudden you're kind of looking at the audience and you're feeling like, okay, this is actually a real audience that's, you know, building for this band. And I also love those moments where, you know, maybe as a result of something, you know, myself or the band's done, but you can't quite put your finger on it, but, you know, something comes out of somewhere where someone's heard that band's music and they love it, and, you know, they're either reaching out as a fan or they're reaching out because they want to, you know, play it on their radio show somewhere that you've never heard of, or they want to do something. I love those moments where you just think, how the heck did that kind of get there? And I guess, you know, that's where the internet once again comes into it, you know, because you just think like, okay, so someone shared it somewhere. So I love that. I love those kind of surprises where, you know, you can feel your band's work starting to find its audience. I think that's tremendously rewarding. It's hard sometimes, I think, like from a management point of view. I quite enjoy spreadsheets. I quite enjoy accounting. I quite enjoy, you know, that kind of stuff. But it can be hard sometimes trying to flip your brain between going to shows and being in the studio and listening to music, and sometimes having to kind of put that aside and work on the business stuff. You just have to. I love both those things, but it definitely, you know, it's a challenge sometimes trying to kind of switch your brain between, you know, those two worlds. I think sometimes it's very easy to get your band's business confused with your business. Obviously, your band's business is integral and important to your business, but I think it's really important to kind of understand that your business is its own business, and you've got to look after yourself, and you've got to, from a business point of view, but also from a, you know, mental health point of view, and you know, physically, you've got to just sort of, you know, look after yourself as well, because ultimately, if you burn out, if your business burns out, then your band doesn't have a manager. So that's really important. And I think it's really important to kind of just understand that at the end of the day, if you're working in music, you're really lucky, and it's definitely going to be tough sometimes. You know, sometimes there's not a lot of money. Sometimes the cash flow is really hard. Sometimes you really want to sort of do something that you know is going to make money, but you haven't got the money to kind of do it initially, and so you're taking gambles and all that sort of stuff can be really, really stressful. You know, remember that it should still be fun, and and it's still, you know, it's hard work, but it's art. It's, you know, it's great. There's definitely worse ways to make a living. Look, I think definitely something I try to be really careful with is making sure. There's a lot of bands that I really love, and I might love them as a fan, but trying to work out whether that's a band I actually want to do business with. My criteria might be, what other bands am I working with? You know, I'm very careful that, like, I want to make sure if I've got a roster, that the bands on that roster complement each other, they're not sort of totally different, but also that they're not competing for the same space professionally. That might be because stylistically they're a bit different, or they're at different points in their career. Yeah, you know, once again, I've been pretty lucky in that most of the time their schedules are sort of, I guess, like not clashing too much about when they've got releases and that kind of thing. And then definitely, you know, as a band grows, then you start, you know, getting in other people in the team, booking agents, publicists, and that kind of makes it easier. So I think a lot of the time, sort of what part of their release cycle or their touring cycle a band's on will dictate that. But yeah, it's just sort of, I guess, trying to be organised and knowing when you might have to, you know, pull an all-nighter kind of working on something, or, you know, when you've got to actually sort of make sure you take a bit of time off to make sure you're rested. But yeah, and then and really just kind of planning. I suppose this is where looking at your business as its own business is important as well, is like sort of looking at your band's plans holistically, but then also how all those things kind of work together for you holistically. Yeah.